Hi everyone. We are our team OYG is here with yet another wonderful session today with Dr. Alexia from Canada. Uh, Today she's going to talk about healing triangle, the integration of spirituality in health, and a short introduction about Alexia. She has an extensive background in naturopathic education. She's been um, associated with the medical education as the former associate dean of clinical studies in Boston, and she's also been in clinical faculty at CCNM. Uh, Over these days, we've seen a lot of students and doctors who graduated from CCNM and BINM coming and sharing with us a lot of insights. Today we're having a faculty member with us now. And currently she teaches at the Transformational Arts College, Toronto. Looking forward to hearing more about your session today, ma'am. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. And I hope that everyone is going to get a good sleep after this because it's so late for you. So basically, the topic that when you contacted me, I really think a big part of this is having a sense of how spirituality fits into health. And what I've found is that this is a very crucial part of health and well-being for people. And regardless of what you identify or define as spirituality, and we're not speaking about religion, what I'm talking about here is really just having a sense of your own purpose or your role in the world, but also recognizing that you have inside your soul or your spirit. And, you know, the interesting thing is that I'm not sure if any of you have knowledge or just awareness of epigenetics or Dr. Bruce Lipton in terms of his work around how our cells and our genes are impacted by the environment. And the environment is impacted by our sense of consciousness, which is our vibration, so to speak, because we're starting to go into a realm now of seeing that quantum physics, which I don't understand, I don't pretend to understand it, but I do believe very strongly that there's the unseen that holds so much power and capacity around healing. And what I found, I've been in practice now for about 22 years, 21 years. And, you know, in that time, as Azuma was saying, I was involved as Associate Dean of Clinical Studies and faculty member. But what I find in practice, and especially with naturopathic medicine, is that it's meant to be holistic, but we often will approach holism as if we're kind of just working with a machine. And yes, our physiology, our bodies have their own wisdom and, you know, things and parts work together. But again, the idea of how is this all being held and how is it truly integrated and embodied is very important. And that's the model of what's called the healing triangle. Now, the healing triangle is not something that I created. It is a model that I learned from a colleague and friend of mine who's also from British Columbia. His name is Dr. Bob Van Horlick. But when I went to naturopathic school back a long time ago in 1995, what we learned was the integration of the mental, the emotional, the physical, and the spiritual. And, you know, very often people will say, oh, mind, body, spirit, thinking that the spirit is somehow separate from who we are. But it's part of it because, you know, I don't know how many of you are spiritual and what that means to you, because everybody has a different, you know, relationship to their sense of spirituality. When it comes to working with clients, what I find that's very important is that it's realizing that the body, the physical body or the emotional body has an impact and is influenced by what we're believing. So really it goes into our belief system as well. So this model of the healing triangle, I'll hold it up to my camera and hopefully you're going to see it. I think you can see it. Oh, somebody bopped off the call. So I hope you can see that clearly I'm going to peek my head around. But essentially what this shows you is the the balance of the healing triangle. So there's the mental, the physical and emotional that are the points of the triangle, and the circle around this is this spiritual consciousness. You could call this prana or chi or the vis, the vital force. It is the unseen energy that holds us and supports us. The central dot that you see in the triangle is basically balance. And when there is a problem, let's say someone comes to you and they have a physical ailment, it throws this dot over to one corner, which throws the whole system out of balance. The same thing if somebody has a lot of emotional issues or there's mental issues. And again, the spiritual aspect of consciousness is also an area that can be vulnerable. So just to elaborate a bit more, what the mental aspect is our thinking mind. So that means when you have someone who, let's say they have excessive worry, or they sort of have a lot of obsessive compulsive, tendencies, or really the thinking mind. We all have a thinking mind, as we know. The problem is sometimes we think too much and we disconnect from the rest of us. So the thinking mind, of course, influences our emotions and vice versa. And then it also shows up in the body. Because I don't know about you, but I don't know anyone who does not believe or realize or accept that if they have excessive anger, excessive worry, excessive anything, that absolutely it shows up in the physical body, whether it's high blood pressure, whether it's an ulcer, whether it's inflammation on any level, whether it's insomnia. This is why this holism is, it's a system of flow. And the idea of spirituality, I'm a huge advocate of meditation. Doesn't have to be seated meditation. It can be walking meditation. I also really advocate for people to step into nature and be part of the rhythm of nature, to notice that we share something with the plants around us. We share something with the earth. We share something with the animals and the creatures. And when we disconnect and believe that we're not part of nature, that is a problem. So, it's funny when I work with individuals, I don't necessarily jump into spirituality and consciousness, because in the Western world, I don't know how it is where you guys are, because of course every place is different, but it's very systematic in terms of fact. People want to know evidence, and they've lost a lot of their ability to be in a place of mystery and curiosity, and trust that they don't know everything. We know that science does not have all the answers. Science has limitations. And the problem is that science and spirituality split, and they've been split for a long time. But the mystics and the ancients knew that this is not separate. It's actually part of it. Just because something exists in physical form doesn't mean that, how did it get there, right? Doesn't mean that something that doesn't exist in physical form doesn't exist. So when we think of something as basic as electricity, we don't necessarily see it traveling through the wires, but it's there. The same thing is true of, our sense of when we feel somebody's energy, or we feel something is, something's not right. That is something that can't be measured, which to me in naturopathic medicine is the vital force, is the vis medicatrix naturae, is the healing power of nature, which we cannot measure it through labs. We cannot do blood tests or imaging, but we feel it. And this is how I believe naturopathic medicine is so ahead of itself in many ways. And I believe that we have to make sure that we continue to incorporate this aspect of spirituality or consciousness or whatever you want to call it as part of health and well-being. So I hope that makes sense in terms of the importance. And typically I'll start with small steps with people, anything from, just noticing their breath, really having a, kind of an awareness of the physical body, because very often it's easy to live in our heads, right? It's easy to constantly be thinking and ruminating and searching. The mind is powerful. And we also have to know that, yes, we need our mind, but we also need to pay attention to how our body is communicating, how our emotions are communicating, and also our relationship to not only ourselves and our cellular matrix, because inside we each have our own universe, but also what's going on outside. And, as I said, I don't always talk about this with clients because some people find it odd. And so I start with what is comfortable for them around their own sense of health and well-being. So regardless of the presentation, if someone presents with migraines or diabetes or heart disease, that of course I'm still going to address the physiology, but I'm also going to make sure that I start to address with their connection to themselves. Like, what is happening for them in their body? What is their inner advice? And that is so important to me in terms of naturopathic medicine, is knowing that we can give supplements and herbs and homeopathy and do acupuncture. And there's still this piece of awareness that exists in the person. And they have the expertise, not us. They have the expertise, but it's learning how to practice having that quietness or that self dialogue where we listen to that inner voice and even talk to the pathology. I know that sounds odd, but when someone has diabetes or, let's say, heart disease, I may say to them, what is your heart telling you? What is your heart trying to tell you? Because symptoms show up in the body, right? When we look at the physics of this, we have vibration, and as the vibration slows or stagnates, then it forms solid masses, which is why you could see that things like using chanting or even music, creativity, I believe, is also very much part of healing and spirituality. Dance, color, being again in nature, because becoming more sensate, meaning that you notice your sense of self, allows us to expand our identity. And this is very important when we see people who are unwell and they have identified with the label of the diagnosis. The label is information, but it is not who they are. And that's really the essence of what I mean around spirituality and health. So I hope that made sense. Any questions or
Yes, of
comments?
course it did. Okay, so my first question is like you were telling that once you get a patient in your clinic, you're going to address their connect with the nature and with themselves. How do you do that?
Okay, sure. Good question, Azuma. So really, I sort of get a sense of, the patient's main concerns. So they might say their blood pressure or whatever it is that's bothering them. And then I'll start asking them, okay, based on that model of the healing triangle, I get a sense of, okay, what do they worry about? What's their response to stress? And then how do they express themselves emotionally? How do they express? Do they hold it in? Do they, you know, yell or cry or get sad? What's their expression? And I'll look for an outlet, that something that maybe they really love to do. It could be cooking, anything that is creative and allows us to be free. Our human nature is we long for freedom, and freedom of expression is part of that. So I might suggest to them, around their creativity. And some people will say, oh, no, I'm not creative at all. I can't, I don't sing, I don't dance. So I'll start with, do they like to write? Do they like to draw? Or some people just like to be in nature. And if they like to be in nature, then I will say, great, now let's take it further so that when you're in nature, you start to pay attention to how you feel, like noticing the sun on your skin, noticing the wind in your hair or on your face, noticing, picking up a stone or a rock and walking with that rock while you carry it, maybe touching a tree or noticing anything that is around you, because it's the relationship, and we have to feel more connected, because we often will feel disconnected from ourselves. And when we have an ailment, when people have an ailment that they're suffering from, they start to focus just on the disease. And this is not good, in my opinion. We need to focus on this is there, and we are working with healing it. But we have to also see that there's so much more to a person than the disease. Because remember, pathology, the word pathology actually comes from the language of Greek, and I happen to be Greek background, but it's the study of suffering. That's really what it is. So there's suffering that's here. And again, diseases don't happen overnight. We're not emergency physicians where someone's coming in and they have a broken leg and they need immediate surgery or whatever it is. Often when it's more chronic, it's like, well, what happened? What was happening for this to suddenly start and to develop and take hold? Which is why things like with nature, we see that, the seasons, we have lots of seasons. In winter, I've never had the privilege of or the honor to visit India. I hope to one day, but here the seasons are quite dramatic, and right now it's heading into winter. So the trees have no leaves. They look dead, but they aren't dead. They're just quieter. But in our sort of Western world, we have this mentality of we have to keep working, we have to keep doing, and we forget that, oh, how do we bring a better balance? But that's an example of what I'll suggest to a client, is around how to be in nature and not just go for a walk, but actually be a part of it, which means that you have a practice of noticing yourself in nature. And again, this is a dance. We're kind of in and out, in and out. It's not like we completely stay present all the time. I don't know anybody who can completely stay fully present. We have an awareness of connecting to ourselves and then connecting out here. And that dance is, to me, part of life. It's part of being human, is that sometimes we're caught up in a lot of worries, and then sometimes we're able to remember to bring it back to ourselves. That's just an example of how I'll start with someone working with their sense of consciousness. And also, I might do meditations or guided meditations where they visualize their organs, whatever. Let's say they have, I'm using cardiovascular as an example, but let's say they have coronary artery disease. Well, the coronary arteries, as you know, will be filled with plaque. So that needs to be addressed from a physiological standpoint, in terms of herbs, medications, diet, exercise. And they can also bring in visualization of seeing the arteries very healthy, visualizing the clearing. And who's to say how much impact that will have? But I do believe that it allows the patient to focus more on their health rather than focusing on the disease. And that is energy, because there's a saying that wherever we put our attention, our energy will follow. And that goes back to quantum physics, because it's shown that, as soon as you observe a molecule or an atom, it will shift. And it's not stagnant, it's waves. These are all waves that we're around all the time. So those are some examples that I'll use with people. If they don't like meditating and they have a difficult time, then I won't do a meditation that they're closing their eyes and seated. I might have them, do a walking meditation just to notice their feet as they touch the ground. And it really, meditation for me is when we bring our focus to one thing and we try to be fully present with that moment, whatever we're doing. So you could technically be meditating while you're listening to me. I could be meditating while I'm talking, as long as my attention is placed on something very specific. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we shut the world out. It means that we just allow ourselves to be in our bodies and in our sense of, experience, our experience. We all have personalities, but our experience is individual. So I hope that answered your question, Dazuma.
Yes, it did, and it is lovely listening to you explain the things. And my another question is like, when people are not feeling well physically or mentally, they don't really understand the fact that they lack something spiritually as well. And once, as healthcare providers, we tell them that it is time for them to connect back to nature and to themselves. I guess like once they are in the disease mode, it is hard for them to stay, because mindfulness is not just a happening but it's a process. So how do you have you faced problems with patients not finding it difficult to stay in the process, or how does it go?
You cut out a little bit there at the end, so I think I understand your question. It's are you asking specifically when a client or a patient is they're suffering and they sort of it's difficult for them to make change? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah, and that is very challenging. And what I find is that I learned a long time ago from a teacher I had who said there's a very big difference between healing and curing. And healing is when we become more whole, meaning that, yes, there might be this pathology that's present or a diagnosis that's present. And the stories that we attach to it, so the stories that the patient attaches, is what I work with as much as possible. So that, if they say, oh, I have this, I have ulcerative colitis, or I have, a stomach ulcer or H. pylori, or whatever the ailment is, it's recognizing, okay, this is here. And what are we going to do in terms of realizing that there's other parts of you? And this takes practice. It doesn't happen easily for people. What I find is helpful is that, again, people are willing to accept that, it's the idea that, oh, this is here, and am I able to still have a fulfilling life? It's a little bit different when someone has something that is a terminal illness, and that is where we have to be able to accept and see that death is part of life. And I don't say that lightly by any means. And it takes some training, of course, and some experience to be able to first realize and accept that we're here for a particular period of time. And when we are afraid and we kind of not afraid, but we ignore that death exists, then that creates a lot of stress, because it creates a lot of anxiety. It doesn't mean we give up and surrender and we stop trying to be healthy. It just means that we realize that at any time in our lives, we could die. We don't know. We don't really know. So, so when people are kind of in that place, first there's some grief involved for sure. And often if a diagnosis comes up that's quite permanent, I'll use the example of my sister. One of my sisters has 3 autoimmune conditions. And she was first diagnosed. She had psoriasis growing up, which has an autoimmune component. And then later on, she was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, and she had a thymoma. And what happened for her was that she identified very strongly with myasthenia and thought that, this is who she is. And this has been her struggle for, I'd say, the last 15 years, where she's sort of seeing that she's more than just the disease. But it's difficult because the myasthenia does impact her life. So it does impact her ability to be physically active, or to be around a lot of stimulation, because she fatigues quite easily. And her practice now, she's starting to work more with meditation, and she wants to bring in yoga, and she is on pharmaceutical medications. She does take some supplements and some herbs when she can. But underlying this is, again, this sense that this is here and it's okay that it's here. That's what happens often, is people think that it shouldn't be here. And that resistance when saying this shouldn't have happened to me, this shouldn't be here, this is a fine line between, I guess, acceptance, but acceptance around it doesn't mean it has power. If we allow something, we're often afraid of that we're going to suddenly give all our power away. But that's not true. It's around believing that we are adaptable, knowing that we are adaptable. And really, it's around perspective. When people see that, oh, there are others who have a situation that's much worse than me, that can sometimes help people, but not always. So I don't have a simple answer. I think that, sometimes people are going down a path, and I don't really know what will wake them up, so to speak. And usually what I find is when health issues happen, big health issues happen, that some people do sort of go, oh, I better shift how I'm relating to myself. And that might be, could be just really their own sense of belief, because as we know, there are people who smoke and drink and they live until they're 95 or 100 and they have a good life. So that's not the cause. That's not. What is it? What is it that keeps somebody vital? And I don't know, but I do know that the people that I know who have this vitality have a depth of awareness, generally speaking, that somehow just keeps them going. But everyone is very different. And I think that that's where I love naturopathic medicine, in terms of individualizing the treatment and seeing that every individual is unique, so that we don't have a cookbook approach. And that's, conventional medicine has value, absolutely. And also we need to see that individualization, especially when it comes to things like homeopathy and is and even botanical medicine, very individualized, which is important to recognize that not every shoe will fit the same person. So when someone has that difficulty being motivated, or feeling that they are really trapped in the disease, that is the mental aspect, the mental rumination of the excessive worry, the thinking, and believing that that is what's going to happen. And you do need to challenge people and their beliefs, because, we get addicted to our suffering sometimes. So sometimes when people, for example, an example I can give you is, let's say somebody decides to quit smoking, and they have a belief that as soon as they quit smoking, they're going to feel fantastic. Well, generally speaking, that doesn't happen, because when someone stops any kind of addictive pattern, whether it's smoking, alcohol, worry, work, sex addiction, it doesn't really matter what it is, it's an addictive pattern, that suddenly they will feel things. They suddenly have to face things. And that's where we have to be prepared to tell the patient that, okay, you want to do this and this, so be prepared that you might feel a bit of discomfort, because healing is not linear. It's not like a graph where it's just, you go from point A to B. Healing is a wave. It's up and down. It's like there's a game called Snakes and Ladders. I don't know if you know it, but it's not linear. And this is what I think is a very big difference between healing and curing, is that, curing is like, it's gone, the symptoms are all gone, it's done. And that can happen for sure. When we look at acutes, for example, and some chronic ailments, when there's been some time and some effort in terms of alignment, but it takes commitment, right? It does take a commitment and a promise to the self that you're going to honor not only your personality or your character, but your physical body, your mental health, your emotional health, and of course, that unseen force of the prana or chi, or the spiritual consciousness, or the vis. I call it the vis. So I give you a long-winded answer, Azuma.
But I mean, like, they really mattered. I should say, like, it did
Okay.
make sense. So I guess, like, we should really take some time to figure out all the wise words you said, but there's something inside that which is healing by in itself. Thank you. It was good, actually. Thank you so much. So I guess we've come to the end of the session. The last 30 minutes was really good. I should say it was nice because this is the part that every healthcare professional should, bridge in their healthcare providing. And I hope like when people get to see this online, they will spend some time connecting themselves and helping people connect themselves to nature and understand
Yeah.
the healing power of nature.
The healing power. And also as practitioners, you guys are students. It's very, very important that you do this for yourself as self-care, because then you have the ability to hold the space for the client, the patient. But we have to take care of ourselves first. It's like the oxygen mask on the plane. You put it on yourself before you put it on anybody. And in our profession, we tend to be givers and we want to help, and that can be a slippery slope sometimes. But the healing power of nature, the vis, consciousness, God, whatever you want to call it, it's there.
So probably the next thing I'm going to do the morning I wake up is going to go connect to the nature.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you for having me. And I
Wonderful
wish you
session.
all very well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.